Firstly, I'm going to just mention some of the sorts of issues we're going to be discussing. We're going to start with questions about what's often called the sanctity of human life or the right to life. And we're going to start with some difficult cases for that view and lead from that into discussions of questions like abortion and euthanasia. What you have here is a picture of an anencephalic infant. An anencephalic infant, the term is Greek and essentially means no brain. And that's, in a real case of anencephaly, that's what you have, and that is the case with this unfortunate infant. It's not just the angle at which the infant is taken, there really is, the top of the skull is really missing here. And there is, you may think, well, if there's no brain, then isn't the infant brain dead? But there is brain stem function. The brain stem is the part of the brain that controls the things that you do without consciousness. So it controls breathing, heartbeat, circulation, and so on. So this infant is not brain dead, and depending on the amount of medical intervention you have, could live for some time. And there are a variety of ethical questions, obviously, that raises. Should we try to keep the infant alive? And further, the question has been raised, if you have another infant who has good prospects but has a heart defect, would it be ethically permissible to take a heart out of this infant and transfer it to the other infant? So that's a kind of question that forces you to think about what is there really something precious about human life? Does it really apply to all human beings? And if so, why? And then, as I say, we'll lead on to other questions which have wider practical application, because this is a fairly rare condition. Okay, another question that we're going to be talking about towards the end of the first half of the semester is questions about global poverty. In a way, they're also questions relating to the sanctity of human life, but not to the direct taking of human life, but rather to questions about obligations to save human life or simply to help people in extreme poverty when we have the capacity to do so. So what are our obligations as people living comfortable lives in an affluent nation? What are our obligations, if any, to help people who are much less well off than we are, maybe so poorly off that they are threatened with death through lack of food, or more commonly through lack of basic health care, or lack of safe drinking water, or protection from diseases like measles or malaria. So that's an issue, unlike the one about the anencephalic baby, that's an issue which faces us all in a way, all of us who have some capacity to help others. And a third issue and another one that again faces us all is concerned with ethical questions about what we eat. We tend, if people say to you, well, what are some important ethical issues? We tend not to think about what we eat as, it's not one of the first ethical issues that come to our mind, perhaps, but it is a really important ethical issue, and people are increasingly starting to realise that for a number of different reasons. One of which is the way we treat animals, and that raises the question about, well, what is the moral status of animals? Animals are not human. Of course, we couldn't lock up humans in conditions like those pigs, which are fairly standard for the breeding sows in intensive pig farms. We couldn't treat humans like that, but society seems to accept that we can treat animals like that. Why is that? Is there an essential difference? Is there something that separates humans from animals that's morally very critical to how we can treat them? And that means that while it would be wrong to treat humans like that, it's not wrong to treat animals like that. If there is such a difference, good, then we need to know what it is. We need to examine possible candidates. If there's not, then perhaps there's an ethical question raised about whether we should eat products that come from animals treated like that, or maybe treated in other ways as well. Where are the boundary lines? So that's one question that certainly is raised by when we ask what are the ethics of what we eat. There are also environmental questions that are raised by that in terms of the environmental impact of different choices of diet. We'll talk about that as well. And just finally, among the examples, again, I think it is something that affects us all, but is also clearly something that we need to deal with on a larger level too. I think it's obvious that climate change is real and that there is a human contribution to it. That's the overwhelming consensus of scientists in the relevant fields. Clearly that's open to question. In a free society, people should be able to question that and to raise doubts about that, and can look at that, but this is an ethics course rather than a science course. So if there's even a substantial probability that the overwhelming consensus of scientists are right, then there's an ethical question about what we ought to be doing about climate change. What are the ethics of that? And that may, as I've just said, affect our choice of what we ought to be eating, but it may affect our choice in many other ways, including energy use, transport, and so on. And also, clearly, it ought to affect our responsibilities as citizens in a democratic society. Because if this is something that needs to be changed and needs to be changed drastically, we can change our own lives, we can make a difference, but it's going to be a very small difference. And this is a global problem that to solve is going to need global action or coordinated action among the major nations of the world. So what are our responsibilities to try to ensure that that happens? That raises ethical issues, as I say, both at the personal level and at the public policy level. What kind of stance should the US be taking in relation to climate change in discussing things with other nations?